I'm Roland Blechschmied. I'm from the south of Germany, living in Freiburg, and I am the director of the Freeride Spirit. That's a short film that celebrates motorcycle culture, especially enduro riding, shining a light on the different motives of diverse cultures and riding in different countries. My film got selected for the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival, and I'm very honored to be speaking about it in this podcast today.
Welcome to the Real Riders Podcast. My name's Simon Josie, and if this is your first time here, welcome and thanks for listening. Before we get to my chat with Roland, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things that former guests have posted to YouTube recently. Firstly, Episode 6 guest Brent Pearson posted a video titled 7 Reasons Why I Went from GoPro to DJI for Motorcycle Videos on the 11th of November. Listeners will know I'm a fan of Brent's tutorial and review videos, well actually all his work, and this is another excellent addition to his channel. The title says it all, and I recommend you take a look if this is an area of interest for you. Secondly, Episode 4 guest Nick Jacobs, known as Project Biker on YouTube and Instagram, released a trailer for his next film on the 12th of November. The title of the YouTube video is London to Montenegro Off-Road Honda CRF Movie Trailer. I recommend you check it out and get the popcorn in. At the time of recording this, it's not known when the new film will drop on YouTube. As always, if you have the time and inclination, please consider rating or liking the Real Riders podcast in your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. This will help other listeners find the podcast. Righto, let's get to my talk with Roland. Welcome to the podcast, Roland, and thanks for being my guest today. How are you?
I'm great, actually. My eyes are burning. I'm currently in Berlin for a work trip abroad. And I went river surfing yesterday, and somehow my eyes got washed with a whole lot of river water. So they're burning today, but other than that, I'm great. Thank you.
Super. So look, we first met at the TMFF Motorcycle Film Festival in Toronto, and I got to see your film, The Freeride Spirit, at its world premiere. Was it the world premiere, in fact?
It actually was the world premiere in Toronto, Canada.
Yeah. So it was one of 15 films chosen to be shown at the festival. Tell us about your film, your motivation for creating it.
The motivation of creating it is actually a very difficult question, because I've been planning and not planning this film for the past 10 years. So ever since I got into motorbikes, I was already producing short little movies and flicks for friends in the whole skateboard and mountain bike scene. And ever since I started riding motorbikes, I was always like, there's so many different cultures and there's so many different people that I met riding bikes all over the world. And I thought, oh, all those landscapes that I've seen, all those people that I met and all the stories that they had to tell, I would love to eventually bring all of that together and sort of showcase what is possible to experience on the back of a motorcycle, really. And so I just took my camera along for the journey of the past literally 10 years. I was filming, I was interviewing, never really knowing where the whole journey would go. And eventually I figured, okay, now it's time to bring it all together. So I moved to Sri Lanka for 3 months. I basically locked myself in a little hut close to the beach where I could surf and edit all day. And that's what I did. And that's when I brought it all together and tried to tell the story that I'm telling within the film.
And the film focuses very much on enduro riding. Why was that?
Well, first of all, because enduro, like in all the motorcycle disciplines that there are, enduro and especially hard enduro is my discipline of passion for sure. And I think it really enables me to go places and to meet people that other forms of motorcycling wouldn't be able to. And that is because you can reach the most remote areas of this planet on a hard enduro bike. And typically you're gonna find yourself in a situation where you need help, where you need to work together in order to either make it home or make it up to the mountain wherever you're trying to climb. And that's how you get really close to the people that you're with, fixing, I don't know, flat tires, broken bikes, sometimes broken bodies also. And that's where you connect with the people. And that is what enabled me to tell their stories, because I got to know them that close.
And the characters in the film, how did you get to meet them? Did you meet them before, or did you like literally meet them on the trail? And do you have any sort of ongoing relationship with them?
So, do I have any sort of ongoing relationship with them? Yes, with all of them, because it is actually pretty crazy. Once you've done a trip like that together, it's like you're instant mates and you'll stay it forever. But how do I meet them? Some of those people, especially one of my good friends now, Marko Prodan from Endurides in Croatia, he was the first person to kind of bring me into this. I saw his Enduro Tour company in a magazine, a German magazine, and it had an email and it had lots of cool pictures from the venue. So I just emailed him, hey, I think it's really cool what you're doing. Would love to come and I'll give you a video if I can stay there for a week and shoot with my friend. And he said yes. So we came over and we started shooting. We started having a good time. And that's how I met him and some of the people working for them, offering to work in exchange for a bike and a place to stay, really. And then obviously I met people along the way. For example, I was on a surf trip in Indo with friends that have nothing to do with motorbikes. And then I saw a motocross track, if you can call it a motocross track. It was more like a dirt hole, really, and some people riding around on really shitty old bikes. And I just came up to them. I was like, hey, is there any way that I can join? And they were like, yeah, take my bike, do a jump, really, please. And that's the beauty about Enduro. It's that small that, as I said, you instantly connect with people. And that's how I met at least half the people, just somewhere randomly along the way. And all of them are still good friends to this day.
And do you ride with any of them regularly?
Yeah, for sure. Especially one of the main stars, I would say, of the film is Kevin Galles. He's quite a well-renowned hard enduro rider in Germany. I got to meet him also through the whole experience in Croatia. And he happens to live literally just half an hour from my place. So we meet up on the weekends. We go to France typically to ride some hard enduro. We go to see the local motocross tracks. And yeah, him and then Maxi, also one of my very, very good friends. We started the whole thing together. And we basically spend every weekend riding mountain bikes or motorbikes together. So yeah, those people are definitely part of my closest circle still.
So you mentioned that you gathered the footage over about a 10-year period, and then you sat in this hut in Sri Lanka. How long did the post-production take? Was it just those 3 months, or was it actually longer than that?
Oh, it was way longer than that. So those 3 months, I took those especially because I had a chance to do it with I'm actually a PhD student at the University of Freiburg. So I don't really have that much time to do editing in my normal day-to-day life. But there was an opportunity opening up with uni. And I knew if I invested those 3 months on top of all the editing that I had done prior to that, I would probably be able to get it to somewhere finish the whole project. So I took that opportunity, but I think I started editing around 2 years ago, honestly. And I kind of put the storyline together. I recorded all the voiceovers from my side that I needed. But I changed the whole project a few times because I was never happy with how the full story sort of unfolded. So I would edit a little bit, I would record some more voiceovers, and I would start again. It was a huge puzzle, and that took around 2.5 years in total to piece it together.
Mm. Given that you had coverage or footage that was up to maybe 10 years old, did that cause problems in terms of matching the old footage with the newer footage to give the film a consistent look throughout?
Certainly that was one of the problems. The main problem was actually the whole 4K kind of standard that came along, I would say, 6 years ago. It was first that was not the biggest problem because nowadays you can easily upscale stuff in Premiere. There's lots of programs that help you with that. And the second thing was frame rates, because back then, kind of 50p was the standard in, let's say, consumer-oriented cameras. So obviously the cinema cameras and stuff, 10,000 euros up and above, would be able to record 120 at that time, 120 frames, I'm saying. And that was not the standard back then. So in terms of slow motion, that definitely presented an obstacle. But also here, there's programs that do frame blending and frame interpolation. Those were super expensive to get, but with that, you can make up for the frames that you didn't record back then, and you can still make it look very smooth, actually. So technology and AI has been a massive help in sort of restoring all of the older footage. And then one big factor also that helped the whole process is that I stuck with the same camera model. So I started on Panasonic GH3. Now I'm on the GH6. And I would always just get the newer model. So the look was kind of the same throughout all those cameras. So color matching it, for example, wasn't that hard. It was just about the hard technical specifications, such as frame rate and then also the aspect ratio.
Right. Tell us about the decision to include, I guess it's a creative decision, but I think it's quite an important one, to include the voices of the riders in the film and having them actually speak in their own languages, as opposed to asking them to speak in English, or if they were speaking in their own languages, to overdub, have someone narrate over the top in English. Now, maybe as a European, you're completely used to that because, of course, there are subtitles in the film, but there are certain markets in the world which are very resistant to original language and subtitles and things like that. So to me, it seems a very conscious decision. I don't know if it was, but I thought artistically or creatively, it was also an important decision. What was your thinking about that?
So that's a very good question. And it was definitely a conscious decision to choose to have the people express themselves in their language for many reasons. Number one, obviously, you can always express yourself the best in your native language. So I wanted to give as much creative freedom for all of the interviewed people to express themselves as good as they can. That being the number one reason. Second, I love the sound of the different languages that have a different flow to them. And I feel like that flow almost sometimes translates onto the bike. For example, there was an Italian guy. I'm in love with the Italian and the Spanish language. And you can hear by the staccato of his voice, you can always see it in the flow that he rides with also. And it's those nuances that for me make riding motorcycles really, really special. Those tiny little things that you can hardly see but only feel, really. And I wanted to preserve that at any cost. And then lastly, one thing that fascinates me about languages and that I really only understood once I started learning Spanish at a higher level was that different languages open the possibility of saying things that other languages can't say. There's things that you can express in Spanish that German or English cannot say, literally cannot say. Then I had a Japanese flatmate, for example, and she was teaching me about the Japanese grammar and how that works. And there's so many things that they can express that we can hardly grasp because our language, especially the English language being quite a simple one, cannot express. And I didn't want to take that opportunity for people to express these very specific nuances that are, for me, what characterizes motorcycle riding as a sport. So those factors all combined, it was clear to me that I really want people to express themselves in their languages.
Yeah. One of my favorite aspects of the film was your inclusion of crashes, offs, failures to execute some wildly ambitious maneuvers, and to concentrate those at one point in the film. From memory, it was about 3/4 of the way through it. I'd like to suggest that that sort of anchored the film in some reality, almost brought it back down to earth, especially because it came 3/4 of the way through the film. All too often I see sport or action films where the action is perfect, it's error-free. And after a while, those films seem a little clinical, maybe a little bit unreal. I remember watching a Danny McCaskill video years ago. Now, if you don't know who Danny McCaskill is, he's
He's a crazy trials guy.
yeah. What he does with a bike is just amazing. And he's been doing it for a long time. But, one of my lasting memories of the film was he put the outtakes onto the end of the film where he'd had some crashes and stuff. And it seemed to me like the failures to execute underlined or reinforced just how impressive his successes were. And it showed that there was real jeopardy in what he was doing. Does that resonate with you? Is that what you were also trying to convey when you decided to include those crashes and offs and failures into the film?
Definitely. If you remember in the film, while I'm showing this sort of, you can call it maybe a crash reel almost, I'm telling a story of, it was Jesus Zavala, a good friend of mine from Mexico. And I asked him what enduro means for him. And he's explaining that enduro means not giving up after failing, because failure is not a question. It's inevitable. You will eventually fail. You will crash for sure. And it's about getting back up and trying again and finding solutions when you really think there is no way out here. And that sounds kind of cheesy, I know, with the whole don't give up thing. But this is the number one thing that I learned in enduro. As you can also see in the outtakes a little bit, you get frustrated. You start screaming, you'll go full tantrum sometimes because you think it's not possible to ride your bike up there. And this is exactly where it comes in, that your friends help and they motivate you. Sometimes they help you carry the bike somewhere. And that is a key aspect of hard enduro, the failing. Because as I said, you will fail. The question is not if, but when. And overcoming these failures with your friends, or sometimes just within yourself, is what makes this sport very special to me. And so I definitely wanted to show that part, that people do fail, but together they will overcome that. And that for me is one of the key morals of hard enduro, of the spirit of hard enduro. You see it even in the bigger races. Sometimes Erzberg, for example, sometimes it's that hard that even the pro class can't finish on their own. So they started teaming up and doing it together. And that is something that I've never seen ever before in any other sport, really. And I think this is what makes us and our sport so special. So hence, I wanted to feature that in the film, because there is a lot of crashing happening. There is a lot of teamwork happening. And that's why those connections are formed so profoundly.
And did you have a storyline already mapped out even before you started doing the editing, or did you discover the storyline through the editing process?
So the storyline sort of was, I had something in mind, and that was showcasing why different cultures do the sport and what they feel with their different backgrounds. But the whole storyline, as I just explained, with the crashing and helping each other and stuff like that, actually came from the interviews. I asked people what means enduro for you. And based on their answers, I put together the editing. As I said, for example, the Mexican guy was explaining about the whole crashing, helping each other and overcoming obstacles. But then, for example, there was a Finnish guy who said for him, it's more the solitude, getting out of your own head, just feeling and enjoying the feeling of being in full control of your body and your bike. And so that is edited with the piano music, him going alone through the snowy sections, for example. So the people actually wrote the story with their answers to the interviews. I kept the interview questions as open as I could to allow for that. And that's how I built the story. I puzzled together from the interviews, really.
And just what was the experience of sitting in a theater and watching your film, like sitting with an audience? I mean, I guess that was the first time you'd done that, yeah?
It is, and it was incredible, really. As I said to Caius, who was the director of this festival, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. It was my first film that I've ever made, and as you can tell by what I just explained, it was so long in the making, so many people involved, and to feel it come together in this theater and see people watching it and understanding the story that I wanted to tell with it is a feeling that I don't have the words to describe. Absolutely incredible. And I'm honored. I'm truly honored that this has come true.
And was it the first time that you've seen it projected on such a large screen?
It was. It was. The biggest I've ever seen it before was on my editing screen. I have a large editing screen, 4K, to see all the details when I edit. But obviously, that doesn't even come close to a theater. Also, with the speakers that I have there, then the people and the atmosphere, it was mind blowing, really.
So, going back a bit now, tell us how you got into filmmaking and sort of the types of films that you've made.
That's also a very good question. I got into filmmaking very young already, I would say. Back in the day, I was inspired by I would say, Jackass, Nitro Circus, Viva La Bam area, if you remember the early days of, let's say, underground skateboarding and MTV and that kind of stuff, where it was about skate, BMX, action sports, flicks in all sorts of ways that sort of paved the way into it. And that's how I started, like GoPro edits of skating stuff at the skate park and so on. And then from that, I kind of progressed to more, let's say, cinematic films with, I don't know, stuff like The Art of Flight, which kind of showed me, okay, there's a more, let's call it, quality side to it. Obviously, the whole Jackass stuff was more like run and gun. It was more entertainment. And then the filmmaking area started with, the early days of The Art of Flight, a snowboard movie, Travis Rice, which got really popular, was the first movie that really spent big budget in terms of cameras, helicopters, and all that stuff. That was also in mainstream cinemas, and people for the first time realized, whoa, action sports is a thing, and action sports really needs good cameras in order to capture what these athletes are capable of, really. And this is also when I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. I always felt what action sports feels like because I was doing most of the stuff myself. And I was like, if there was only a way to translate that feeling to people who don't do it. And I found that way, hopefully, in filmmaking.
And are you completely self-taught, or have you done any formal training in the area of filmmaking?
I never actually went to film school or anything like that. As I said, the whole filmmaking thing is just my side career, and I basically started it as a hobby passion project. And to this day, it's more of a hobby still. It enables me to financially afford the trips that I do. Obviously, bike trips to those remote places are very expensive. So making films is how I was able to afford it. And that's how I got so deep in it. But I was always doing it on the side to my studies. And there I kind of learned everything through, it was YouTube in the early days. Then obviously you meet other filmmakers, you would ask them. And then a whole lot of trial and error. But yeah, I would say self-taught and no professional training whatsoever.
The trial and error is something that many of the guests who've come on the podcast have talked about. Just go out, try, learn, try again, fail, try. Yeah. I know that you have this film production company, Alive Pictures. So just tell us how that came about and maybe some of the interesting projects that you've worked on.
Yeah, so Alive Pictures is an interesting story, I would say. My company used to be called by a little graffiti that I saw under a bridge when I once passed it on a motorbike. And it said, dream big or don't dream at all. And that I found always kind of cheesy, but I made it sort of let's call it, placeholder for a better name until I would find one. And then a couple of years ago, it might be 7, 8 years ago, I was having a pretty shit day. It was one of those gloomy autumn days in Germany. It's cold. It's almost dark the whole day. It was foggy, and I was like, I'll just go for a ride. Back then, there was a track not too far, so I could ride my bike through this track. And I was on the bike, and I'm still feeling like, I don't know, not feeling it today, kind of. But the moment I went on dirt with the bike, I was doing a little wheelie. Nothing big, but at that time, I really felt this wheelie. It was like 50 meters, 100 meters, I don't even remember. But there's this moment in doing a wheelie on a bike where you feel absolutely weightless. You're levitating, basically. And I felt that moment. And I remember I got down from this wheelie and I stopped for a second. And I was literally screaming under my arm. I was like, fuck, that felt so good. Yes. Finally, I feel alive again after this whole being in the dark and, I don't know, doing study stuff. And there it was. I was like, damn, that's it. I feel alive again. And this is what all of these sports and filmmaking and everything gives me. And this is the feeling that I talked about it earlier, that I want to translate to people who are outside of these sports. This feeling of being at one with your body in that moment that you're just having, you just feel alive. And I dedicated the company to this feeling. And that's why I want to make films to translate that to other people who maybe yet haven't found that. And if I can inspire someone to get out and do things that gives them this feeling, this is why I named the company Alive Pictures.
And some of the interesting projects that you've worked on?
Oh, that's also a very good question. So my most favorite projects are always passion projects where I contact people myself and I'm giving them an idea. For example, the last thing that I did there was exploring the roots of Freeride Enduro in Greece. And I had some partners there that showed me the area, showed me the sort of people that started it, that founded it back in the day. And we were interviewing them and asking them what it feels to them. That was a very special project to me. Then every year I get the chance to work for Red Bull Motorsports for a big hard enduro race that is quite well known in the scene that is called Red Bull Romaniacs. The starting fee is insanely expensive, so I can't afford to race there as a racer. But what we get to do is that we come with our bikes and we shoot on track. And there's not many people that know how to operate cameras and ride a bike at a decent level, because you need a decent level to get to these remote places. And so being able to bridge this gap between riding and filming, we get the chance to get flown out to Romania and shoot in the most incredible backcountry places, really, and see the pros race there. So that is always extremely special for me.
For that sort of on-track filming, are you using, GoPro or DJI action cameras, or are you using gimbal-mounted, should we say, more professional cameras?
It depends really on how much time we have. For the longest days where you have to spend 8-9 hours on the bike and you have to also finish the race course in a certain time, you pack as light as you can. So the bigger cameras and the gimbals are just too risky, but we always pack a drone. The DJI Air, for example, is very small. It doesn't weigh anything really. You have the GoPro, and nowadays, especially because some people ask for Instagram content, you can even film it on an iPhone. But for the bigger shoots and for my own projects, I always bring my camera, I bring a gimbal, and I bring friends that also know how to ride at a certain level. And then our most favorite shots that I think make our projects stand out is when we mount the gimbal together. I sit on the back of someone's bike, and we find two trails that sort of go parallel. And then we ride at the same speed. And I hold the camera on the gimbal. It's extremely sketchy at times, but it really translates the feeling that you get on a trail the best, I feel like. So that's how I typically do it. And you can fit all that stuff in 2 or 3 small backpacks that you can still wear while riding without them molesting too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really interesting what you say, because this is something I've talked about with previous guests, that actually everyone initially thinks that some sort of helmet or chest-mounted GoPro is going to be the most engaging video. But actually, no, it's exactly as you describe it. It's someone shooting a motorcyclist, but from fairly close, like you say, in a 2-track parallel or something like that, or if they can get a drone nice and close following. But of course, drones usually don't fly fast enough. So it's really interesting to hear that you have discovered that yourself as well, that is actually what generates the most compelling footage.
Definitely, because it enables you to look at details in a different way. So what I love about cameras and what always fascinated me is that through the different lenses that you can put on a camera, you can see stuff that the human eye can't actually see. Like with higher frame rates, for example, you can't see slow motion, obviously, but a camera can. And there's those little tiny movements. I'm thinking now, if you think back of the film, we were riding just in Greece on a deserted beach, and in order to ride at the waterline where there's sometimes hard sand, sometimes soft sand, sometimes you go even through the water, there's so many little movements going on in the body, adjusting a tiny little bit. And that can only be seen in slow motion and with a camera that is pointed at an angle that you wouldn't usually be able to see. Especially if you see people like Kevin Gullis riding, he's the absolute master of technique. The little things that he does to make his bike do the crazy stuff that he does on it. Sometimes I only realize that later rewatching the footage, and that's what makes it so incredibly special for me to see those little tiny movements, thinking what this would feel like if you did that on a bike. And that is best shown on this parallel shot, I feel like.
Yeah.
Very hard to get, though, very risky for the camera equipment and the people, but worth it.
Speaking of beaches, I noticed from your website where you've got a nice sort of a taste of your work. So I'll put the link to the website in the show notes so people can go have a look as well. But it's obvious that you've got an interest in surfing as well as motorcycling. And I wanted to ask, what sort of parallels, sort of what differences are there between making motorcycle films and surfing films?
From the film side of things, there's actually a whole lot of similarities. First of all, the whole, let's call it logistics side of it, it is pretty hard to get to most of these locations. And that's why there's not many people who are able to do it. For the motorbikes, obviously, sometimes it's in the middle of a forest where you have to ride 50 kilometers on really, really sketchy trails. So it's hard to get there. Even with a helicopter, you couldn't get there because it's in the forest. You can't land it there. So logistics-wise, this we can also find in surfing, where sometimes you have to walk over lots and lots of cliffs to go down to some secret beach where there's no one, where you can shoot good and lonely waves, really. And then second would be the risk for the cameras and the equipment that you have to have that is very specialized. For example, for the cameras in motorbikes, it's very important that you have high frame rates, that you have incredible stabilization because of the vibration of the bikes. And that paired with point and shoot ability. You typically don't have much time because there's always, for example, the weather that can change, the light situations. Then obviously you're in the middle of nowhere, so you don't have time forever. You can run out of fuel. There's so many things that need to align really to make it happen. So you need a camera. You need to set it up perfectly beforehand so that you turn it on and it has to work. Same in the surf. In a surf session, that can sometimes be 2 hours, 3 hours. You're in the water for 3 hours and you catch maybe 5, 6 waves, 2 of them being good. And that means everything has to work to catch this very specific moment. And if you miss it, you miss it. Same with the bikes. If Kevin jumps down from huge cliffs, 10 meters, there's literally fatal consequences. So those things are a one and done thing sometimes. If you miss it, you miss it. And I think that really is the complexities that these things have in common in terms of surf and motorbike filmmaking. But then also I would say the eye that you need for it, because both of these sports heavily rely on flow. You don't have to be the craziest rider or the craziest surfer, but everything lives and dies with the flow that the person has, kind of the style, the feeling for it. And if you want to translate that as a filmmaker, you need to understand those sports and you need to understand the concept of flowing behind the movements that people do. So to conclude that question, I think surf and moto filmmaking goes very, very close together. And if you understand one of these, you will most likely also understand the other side.
Just practically, what sort of housings do you use with the cameras? Because I've done quite a bit of diving in my past, and obviously when you're diving with cameras, they are under tremendous pressure, and therefore the sealing of the housing is very important because of the pressure. But when you're on the top of you don't need so much pressure protection, I guess I could describe it as. So are there housings that are maybe a little bit cheaper that you can put your cameras into that are designed just for the surface, or are you forced to basically use deep water, things that go down to 30, 50 meters?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's a very heavily debated thing in surf filmmaking. None of this is sponsored, by the way, unfortunately. I wish it was. So I started out on Dica Pack, they're called, which is a very, very cheap solution, but actually a pretty solid one. It kind of looks like a sleeve, like a silicone sleeve almost, that has some rough and tougher plastic parts on it where you slide the camera in, and you can buy that for around 100, maybe $200. But obviously, if you lose that in the water for a second, or if you touch it in the wrong way, or if it touches a rock, it's gonna leak and you're gonna ruin your camera. So I would not do that with my professional cameras nowadays, but this is how I started. And reinvesting the money that I made from those early on shoot days with the Dica Pack, I went to Sea Frogs, which is a Chinese company that has very good housing solutions for an affordable price. Affordable here being $800-900 euros. Always, I'm talking euros, which is fair still, and the housings are very good. If you do want more professional solutions where you can still change the focus of your lens, or you can have variable lens width, then you need to spend extra to get more dome ports and stuff like that. And then the most advanced solution, which I'm looking to get right now, is called liquid eye water housings. They have different ports. For example, a dome port. A dome port is the thing that's often used in surfing, because a dome port is this huge lens that is curved, that looks like a huge fisheye, where you can have this very typical shot of half above, half underwater. That looks very cool. So if you have clear water, that can give you incredible shots. It's also spheric, so that means you have a very wide angle. So Morgan Mason, my absolute ideal surf filmmaker, he shoots in Tahiti a lot with those shots that you have behind the waves, where you can see the little rips and the water bubbles and the surfers sliding their hand in the face of the wave. Looks incredible. But here we're talking more money for the housing than the camera is actually worth, for $5,000 upwards. So that is insane. So that's why a sponsoring would be very nice.
Yeah. And just talking about gear in general, so you talked a little bit about the camera, and I think you said you're using DJI drones. Is there something missing, or something that you've got your eye on that you'd like for your gear, Locke?
Oh, definitely. As I said, the next thing that I'll get is the liquid eye surf housing for the GH6, because with the GH6 being able to record 4K at 120 frames, it would be the ideal camera for surfing, because in surfing, with the water movement and stuff, you need slow motion. So that definitely. I also need to upgrade drones again because of the standards, and I recently crashed mine, so that has to be upgraded. I'll stick to nowadays the DJI Air ones are very small and very capable. I used to have bigger ones, but actually they're so impractical that it's hardly even worthwhile bringing them along. So DJI Air series here is everything that I need. Obviously, the latest GoPro is always very good to have. And then the gear that you kind of have to have behind it is gimbals, and then obviously you need ND filters and stuff like that. And there's so much that you have to spend sort of on these things that people don't typically know. Like a camera itself is, I would say, 20% of what you need. If you want to go all in, it's 10% of what you need. Even if you think all the way back to like hard drives and stuff, nowadays, the stuff that we shoot is terabytes, not gigabytes anymore, it's terabytes. And just storing that stuff on SSD hard drives so that you can edit from them costs you around 400 euros per, let's say, 4 terabytes. So that means every single project you do, you need a new hard drive. So what I'm trying to say is the cameras don't really need to be upgraded that often. It's more the accessories that you need to basically frequently change, upgrade, add stuff to keep the show running.
Okay, just some other sort of general things about filmmaking. So, looking critically at your own work, what areas would you like to improve or further develop in terms of filmmaking?
That's also a very good question. I definitely know what that would be because I was recently joined at my company by a good friend called Stefan Bart, who comes from a photography background. I myself was always just into video, and he sort of took over the photography department. And in photography, it's even more important to be very specific about camera settings. So I'm talking shutter speeds, ISO, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes in my shoots, especially the motorcycle shoots, as I said, it's point and shoot. Like you get off the bike, you set everything up, you shoot, and you don't tend to have as much time to set up the correct settings to get everything out of the situation. And now I got really into the whole surf and documentary kind of filmmaking, where in the documentary side of the surf filmmaking, the shots on the land, not in the water, you actually do have quite a bit of time to dial the settings in perfectly. And that is definitely something that I want to focus more on in the future because there's so much potential with modern cameras if you tweak all the settings to perfection. And that is definitely what I'm catching up on and what I really enjoy doing because the potential is insane if you know what you're doing. And there's always more to learn. And that's definitely going to be my focus for the next bigger project.
You say bigger because I wanted to ask, I mean, do you have any ambitions to, say, do something that's like feature length, for example?
Feature length, I'm not actually sure if I'll do that. Feature length being, I would say, 45 minutes plus. But there's something that is already being shot at this current moment in time, which is another documentary about surfing in northern Spain in the really rugged, cold, windy area of Spain. Also interviewing the people from there in Basque, which is the language that they speak there. It's a very Nordic kind of Viking sounding language. And that project being shot in the dark and in rainy conditions and stuff really also forces us to get all the settings perfectly dialed to capture what this really feels like. So that is the next thing that is in the making. We've already been shooting 2 years on and off for the thing. And we're looking to maybe wrap up the shooting part ends of 2025.
Actually, that reminds me, I wanted to ask, I guess you're recording a lot more dialogue if you're interviewing people for a documentary like that. Do you record your audio into your camera or do you have a separate sound recorder as well?
I always record into my camera directly using the Rode mic setup. And I have those old Apple AirPods that still have the aux, so I can listen to the audio simultaneously. And that I have figured is the best way to synchronize audio and make sure that the quality is always decent. And I mean, obviously, it would be better to record it in the studio, but for all the motorbike stuff and the surf stuff in remote locations, you have to be realistic. So you need to have a camera setup that is portable, and that actually works really fine.
Okay, just to avoid getting into trouble with my my listening audience, I have to ask you about the motorcycling. So, when did you first become interested in motorcycles?
I first got interested in motorcycles when I was 17. And I remember exactly to this day, I was at a skate park, a local skate park, very shitty, small one. And there was a guy who came on a pretty old, worn down super motorbike. And he hit some of the jumps and the ramps at the skate park. And I was like, that looks so freaking cool. He had no idea how to ride. He was not a good rider. But still, it looked so damn cool to me. And I was like, hey, can you teach me how to do that? And so he taught me how to ride a bike. Like he does. He's like, oh, this is the clutch. Release the clutch and you go. I did that and I went up and down one of those little ramp thingies. Nothing special whatsoever. Next day, very next day, I signed up to get my motorcycle license with all the money that I had saved at that time. So I was hooked from that day, and it was the best decision of my entire life. I never looked back. And to this day, today, I'm very happy that I met this guy, Max Saber. Thank you for that.
And so obviously you talked about riding enduro. Is that the only kind of riding you do, or do you do any sort of on-road riding or other types of riding?
In terms of motorbikes, not too much because I can only afford, I have an enduro bike and I have a trials bike. I started getting into trials a couple of years ago because it's the perfect preparation for enduro, especially for hard enduro, to learn the double blip clutch techniques and stuff, to get over obstacles, to get the balance right, really to refine my technique. So I do those two. And other than that, I have some people who have their road bikes in my garage, so I can use them as a sort of that's their payment for using my garages. So I would take them out every once in a while to go have a nice picnic somewhere up on a mountain. I did supermoto once on a racetrack, but nothing really in terms of road cycling. I would love to, but I can't afford getting another bike.
You know, when we first met, we spoke about the challenges of riding off-road in Germany, which was something that I also discussed on episode 18 with my guest, Julie. Like Julie, you're also located close to the French border, and you've told me it's a great location for dipping into France to get your off-road riding or your enduro riding fix. Is the southeast of France, which is sort of where you are, close to, is it full of off-road riders from Germany in the weekends, or do you and your friends basically have the place to yourselves?
Well, so where we go to ride, it's like I would call it a tolerated area. There's lots of French riders, and it's a sort of tight-knit community. You have to know the locals in order to be able to ride there. And then, of course, there's a lot of tracks where you can go ride. In Germany, the problem is even the tracks that we have, motocross tracks mainly, not enduro, they have very, very restricted opening hours. Sometimes it's just 2 hours, and that's probably then typically during the week where you have to drive there for 2 hours. There's traffic jams, and it's simply not really worth it. And there's also not hard enduro. There's no hard enduro, legal hard enduro in Germany. And ever since COVID hit, the forests are full of people, so you don't want to be riding anywhere illegal because it'll just create problems for the scene, and we don't want that. We don't want that our sport is seen as rowdy, because there's a big scene in Germany that is calling themselves the Grenzgänger, and they do wheelies on the road and stuff and putting people in danger, and that's shining a really shitty light on our sport, and we try to avoid that. So we go to very remote places where it's legal, where we know the owners. There's a small training ground somewhere in France. We know the owners of that. It's private territory. It's government approved and everything. And there you can actually ride hard enduro in peace, because we don't want to run into any, hiking people and that kind of stuff. To keep the sport a sport and not to be rowdies messing with road laws and stuff. We really want to make sure that this sport is sustainable. And I think the only way to do that is to stick to the areas where it's okay to do it. Otherwise, it's just going to be way harder in the future to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny what you say about the forests in Germany being full of people. This is the thing that just amazes me, because, I mean, Germany is quite a large place, and it seems there's a lot of countryside and forests. And whenever I stop beside the road, or if I'm in the forest, 5 minutes later, there's always a bloody German walking down the track. They're everywhere. You know, it's just amazing. It just amuses. I mean, I love Germany. Nothing against Germans. Please don't misunderstand me. But it amuses me how many people just seem to be everywhere in the forest in Germany all the time. It cracks me up. What are your? If it sounds like you've ridden in many places across the world. So where have your favorite spots been in the world, and why?
Wow, that is a very difficult question to answer, because there's so many places that I absolutely love. So I would say I would divide my answer here in Europe and rest of the world, because Europe is very easy to reach for the people that will probably listen here. But I would say my number one favorite place in Europe has to be Croatia, because I lived there for half a year at my good friend Marco from Endurides. He also does motorcycle tours and stuff. And what Croatia offered is the variety of the terrain. You can go literally to the beach within 20 minutes of riding, up to crazy high mountains, rocky stuff. And then also within another 30 minutes of riding, deep forests that look like Romania. So in terms of variety and easy accessibility, that definitely is far up on the list. Greece also was very special. My friend Thanasis from North Star Enduro Tours allowed us there to ride little sand dunes that were absolutely crazy, but then also the countryside of Greece with all the mountains that they have is incredible. So those two places I would say for Europe, for sure. And then worldwide, I would actually say Mexico. Mexico, I was racing in Valle de Bravo, which is the race of Jesus Zavala, my friend from there. I'll actually go back for my next birthday in November. Not this one, but next November 2025. Also because of the variety of the terrain. It goes from sandy to full-on rainforest to literally having altitude sickness because you're that high on the mountain. And that combined with the Mexican people, that I just love the Mexican people, the food and everything. Definitely one of my top recommendations where to go to if worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember at the festival, there was a film which sort of celebrated the diversity of Mexico, the people of Mexico, because, you know, Mexico in popular culture gets a bit of a bad rap, and they really wanted to counter that, and it was certainly visually extremely impressive. It's funny you mentioned Croatia. My wife has Croatian roots, and yeah, she needs to sort out her Croatian passport.
Right.
In addition to a New Zealand one, that would be handy for us, I think. Wrapping up a little bit now, Roland. I just want to ask you a couple of final questions. And first of all, who are your favorite visual content creators, and what is it about them that draws you to their work?
That's also a very, very good question, and I would answer that based on the categories. Obviously, starting out with moto, and in moto, that's very special because I got to meet this filmmaker at TMFF, also in Toronto, which is still in Wineland. Him and his creations, sometimes in cooperation with, they used to be called Meta back in the day. Now they're called Vana. And they have a similar look to the whole Deus productions, like Dustin Humphrey, for example. This is what inspired me to do what I do, especially because they have the whole bike and surf culture kind of combined in one. So it's more about the adventure side than the performance sport aspect, and about the traveling, cultural, that kind of side to it. That is something that not many filmmakers showcase. And that is what I love about Dylan's work or Dustin Humphrey's work. So those two in motorcycle films are my number one inspiration. So very honored to meet this guy. Very humble, cool guy. Invited me out to his place to ride bikes in Utah. And it's crazy to see when you meet the people behind those films, how nice, humble, and just normal people they actually can be, doing stuff at the level that they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Does the filming enhance or diminish the pleasure of a motorcycle ride or a surf or anything that you're filming? Does it enhance or diminish those activities for you?
That is a very fine line sometimes. I think it's very important to stay on top of that one, because I have lots of moments on the bike where I'm like, damn, this is so beautiful. I should get my camera out and shoot it. But at the same time, I'm like, maybe I should also just ride and I should enjoy it alone or with friends or live in this present moment. And as a filmmaker, you will always have this dilemma of, should I capture it or should I just feel it? So it's a huge challenge to kind of walk the tightrope between those two. And I honestly struggle with that a lot. But I handle it that way that sometimes I I allow myself to just leave the camera at home and just enjoy it. And that fills me with inspiration to next time bring the camera out and capture it, with even more motivation to really appreciate the moment in the post-production and be like, okay, I took the time, I sacrificed a bit of the feeling to relive this moment later. And that's how I sort of managed to juggle between the two. But that is always a struggle of every filmmaker, and I believe you can never fully solve that problem.
Thanks so much for being my guest today, Roland. I've been lucky enough to see your film, The Freeride Spirit. The trailer is available on your own website, as well as TMFF's website and their YouTube channel. Is there anywhere people can see the whole film now, or are there plans for making it available to a wider audience?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been an honor to speak about everything. I'd like to take this chance to thank everyone who was involved in this project, supporting in different ways. You guys know who you are. And where can you see the film? So there's going to be another premiere in Germany, in my hometown of Stuttgart, which is most probably going to be on the 9th of December, just so I can present everything in front of my home crowd, sort of. And after that, it's going to go live on my website, which is alive-pictures.com. So I really want to make it available to everyone. And after we've seen it in our own little theater, you can then see it probably at the start of next year. But I will for sure post everything on Instagram so that everyone who hasn't had the chance to see it will get their fix also.
Great. Okay. Well, look, thanks so much for being my guest today. We wait for more motorcycle content from you. But for now, thanks. Take care and ride safe.
Thank you. You have a good one, mate. See you soon, hopefully.